Hi, everyone. As Harriet said, the name of our organization is Eliminate Poverty Now, which we often refer to by its initials, EPN. We work with Africa's extreme poor, primarily women and girls, provide them with some combination of education, vocational training, and the opportunity to put new skills to work. So, what exactly does that look like in practice? Well, you're all familiar with the old adage that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for the day, but if you teach that man to fish, you feed him for his lifetime. In the jargon of international development, we'd call that food security, making sure there's enough food that people don't starve to death. Now, in the case of EPN, we take that notion a few steps farther. First, we're mostly teaching women, not men, for all the benefits that come with promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. Secondly, we want that woman to do more than just feed herself and her family. We want her to use that skill to make money, because with money, she can not only feed her family, she can buy clothing, pay school fees for the kids' education, and much more. With money, she can raise the entire family's standard of living. So we not only teach her to fish, we teach her to turn fishing into a business, and will often provide the initial investment to get her started. At Eliminate Poverty Now, our goal is to help people achieve income security and not just food security. Now, that was just for illustration. In practice, most of our projects involve not aquaculture, but horticulture, growing fruits and vegetables for profit. We focus on agriculture because most of Africa's extreme poor live in the rural areas, and about the only economic activity in town in these rural places is farming. Much of the work that we do falls into an area called the African Sahel. It shows up on the map here in pink. It's a relatively narrow climate zone. It sits directly below the Sahara Desert, and it runs east to west about 2,500 miles across the continent. The Sahel starts to get just enough rainfall to support agriculture. Our largest and by far our most ambitious project is in Niger. Here's the country of Niger, sort of right in the center, the northern center of the continent. Not to be confused with Nigeria, which borders it on the south. Here you see Nigeria. The country is landlocked, and it sits on the southern side of the Sahara Desert. And it's our work in Niger that I'll talk to you about tonight. So first, a little bit of background about the country. Niger is one of the poorest countries on earth. In fact, it ranked dead last on the United Nations Human Development Index in 2019. It also happens to have the world's highest population growth rate. Now, those are two really nasty factors to deal with when you're trying to raise the per capita income of a country. 70% of Niger lies within the Sahara Desert. And you can see that most of the population, here's a listing of all of the major towns in the country, most of the population is concentrated in a narrow band along the southern border. Over 80% of Nigerians rely on agriculture for their livelihood, and virtually all of them are subsistence farmers, growing barely enough food to feed themselves and their families. Since farming is such an important part of life in Niger, I need to tell you a bit about the climate there. Niger has 3 distinct growing seasons. In the cool, dry season, runs about 5 months of the year, daytime temperatures typically average in the 90s. As you move into the hot, dry season, temperatures are routinely above 100 degrees and can occasionally tickle 120. In fact, Niger is sometimes referred to as the frying pan of the Sahel. Fortunately, temperatures cool off in the rainy season. Rains are typically concentrated in an 8 to 10 week period, though the growing season itself runs about 4 months long. Now, all of that poses some major challenges for farming, as you might imagine. The photo that you're seeing here is pretty typical Nigerian landscape. Keep in mind, this is not the 70% of the land mass that falls in the Sahara Desert. This is in that southern strip where people are trying to farm. 98% of the crops grown are rain-fed, which is to say they depend on natural rainfall for their water. And thanks, or maybe not so thanks, to climate change, the country is experiencing drought on average in 2 years out of every 5. The fertility of the soil in the country is extremely poor. They grow the same crops on the same plots of land year after year, and they make little use of fertilizer. And then to top it all off, they have a serious problem with desertification. Only 15% of Niger's land today is arable, and even that is being steadily eroded by desertification. The major causes are overgrazing of livestock and cutting down trees which they use for firewood. Each year, they are losing tens of thousands of hectares to the desert. You combine all of that together and you have a perfect storm for chronic poverty and the threat of starvation. So here's the situation. You've got a rapidly growing population that depends on farming for its survival. They're living in a place where it's a real challenge to grow crops and where climate change is making it even more difficult. So we asked ourselves, where in the world are you going to find the experience and the technology to grow crops in such challenging conditions? And the answer that came to us, and I suspect it might occur to you, is Israel. No one in the world has accomplished more agriculturally under such harsh conditions than Israel. So, much of what I'm about to describe comes out of Israel's experience of making the desert bloom. And they have been very willing to share that technology and experience with the developing world. Of course, it all starts with irrigation. I took the 2 photos that you're looking at here during our most recent visit to Niger. They're taken from the exact same spot. The one on the left is taken looking back toward the local village that we were visiting. And then I simply turned around and took the picture on the right. You're looking at one of our major garden projects being farmed by the women from that village. The current buzzword for the approach that we use is climate smart agriculture. It refers to a bundle of techniques that increase crop yields and farmer income in sustainable ways by increasing resilience to climate change. And I'll walk you through just a few examples of the methods that we use. The first, of course, is irrigation. With irrigation, we can raise crops year-round in all 3 growing seasons and largely eliminate the climate risk from drought. Now, in Niger, surface water is extremely scarce, but there are large underground aquifers and often not too deep. We dig wells, like you see here, or boreholes to tap into the supply of water. Next, we need to bring power to the area in order to bring that water to the surface. These villages are almost always off the power grid. So we use solar panels. You see them here, photo on the right. Solar panels to bring water to the surface. The solar powered pumps that we use, you don't see a photo of them here, but the pumps that we use are considerably more expensive to install than gasoline-powered ones, but they're far more efficient to operate. They're more reliable, and of course, they have 0 emissions. We use a variety of irrigation methods, including drip, which you see here, to distribute the water efficiently. And we promote biodiversity by intercropping, bottom left here, intercropping trees and vegetables. Typically, we'll plant 3 to 4 different vegetables in each growing season to minimize the risk of crop failure with any one crop. We rotate crops to maintain healthy soil conditions. We maximize the use of natural fertilizers, manure, and compost. You can see here in the photo in the upper left, and just peeking into the photo over there, that just happens to be Judy coming into view, who's comparing notes with our senior technical supervisor on composting techniques. And we use integrated pest management to control pests and disease and minimize the use of chemical pesticides. Now, we put all that technology to use in a program called Farmers of the Future. Farmers of the Future was the vision of a remarkable man, Professor Dov Pasternak. And you may have heard about me talk about him, may have heard me talk about him several times before. Sadly, Dov passed away in 2018. He was an Israeli agricultural scientist, and he was truly one of a kind. He combined a world-class agricultural science background with a great head for business, a flair for marketing, and a humanitarian heart that had to be 5 times regulation size. It was Dov who constantly preached that focusing on food security was not enough. Of course, it's important to keep people from starving to death. But if food security is the end goal, it still leaves millions impoverished and malnourished. Dov was convinced the goal must be economic security, giving farmers the ability to make a decent income where they currently live and doing what they know best, and that's farming. So he conceived of the idea of Farmers of the Future. We learned of Dov and his idea going back to 2010, when it was still just a prototype in a single village. We felt it had enormous potential to transform lives, and we agreed to work together to test it, refine it, and create a model that could be successful, sustainable, and scalable. And we called achieving those the 3 S's. Now, here's how the program works. We'll go into a community and organize anywhere from 30 to 50 women into a farming cooperative. Then those women are given, totally free of charge, the infrastructure that they're going to need. Think of that as access to power and water, the irrigation system, fencing to keep out grazing animals, farm tools, and so forth. We give them agricultural inputs, the seeds, the fertilizer, and spray that they're going to need for the first year, because they simply don't have the money to spend for those things as we start out. And we'll provide them with 3 years of intensive training and supervision. In the photo that you see here, bottom left, you're looking at 2 women who are learning how to graft fruit trees from one of our technicians. Now, it turns out this training and supervision is the key to the success of the program. The women we work with are almost all illiterate. They're plenty smart, but they don't read or write. They learn best through experience and repetition. You often hear that you need to repeat a new behavior 3 times if you want it to become a new habit. Well, it takes a full year to gain 1 repetition of year-round crop production. So that means a minimum of 3 years to gain enough experience to master these new techniques. Okay, so now back to those 3 S's, and beginning with the first one, which is it successful? Well, the program enables each member of the cooperative to earn up to twice the average annual income of the country. We don't go around making speeches about the importance of empowering women or giving them an opportunity to contribute financially to the family's well-being. No one would listen even if we did. But you wouldn't believe what it does to a woman's self-esteem when she becomes a major source of income for the family. Or for that matter, what it does to the respect that she gains within the household and the community. And that money goes to upgrade the family diet, better clothing, home improvements, access to education for the kids, and to medical services for the family. It is a major improvement in their quality of life. So, yes, we've got a program which is successful. Next hurdle, is it sustainable? Now, of course, you want your program to be successful, but the real test comes when all the outside money and assistance are gone. Is that success going to be sustainable? To be sustainable, our women have to become technically proficient and financially self-supporting. Now, as you heard, we have a knowledgeable field technician who will work in these local communities for 3 years, providing training and supervision. And it gives these women the experience they need to feel comfortable with these new techniques. For example, the picture on the left, this time you're looking at one of our technicians teaching proper seed planting techniques to a number of women. And they need the ability to retain that knowledge and retrieve it when they need it. Now, if you're illiterate, how do you do that? Well, we've borrowed the approach that IKEA uses with its assembly instructions for furniture. Essentially, they're all pictures, no words. So in this middle photo, what you're looking at is the president of one of our cooperatives who's talking us through their pictorial plans for the garden, showing month by month for 2 years exactly what crops they're going to plant, when they will harvest them, and when they'll be ready to sell. So that's the technically proficient piece. What about becoming financially independent? Well, if you remember, I said the women are given free of charge the infrastructure and the first year of seeds and fertilizer. But from the very first harvest that they bring in, we instill a discipline of forced savings. They begin paying dues to their cooperative that are deposited into 2 accounts. One account goes to pay for the purchase of seeds, fertilizer, and sprays beginning in year 2. The second is a reserve to pay for the repair and maintenance of equipment. All of the equipment in the garden has a useful life. It's going to need periodic repair, and eventually it's going to break and need to be replaced. The cooperative needs to accumulate the savings to pay for repairs and replacements as needed. You hear so many stories of projects with apparent success that fall apart as soon as the first piece of equipment breaks. Our women are ready financially to deal with those needs and keep right on going. So that brings us to the final third S. Is the project, is the model scalable? Okay, so we've got an approach that's successful and sustainable, but if we're going to make a real difference in the lives of tens of thousands of farmers and their families, it needs to be scalable. And for that, you need 2 things. You need sufficient financial resources, and you need sufficient human resources to scale it up. If, for example, we wanted to take the Farmers of the Future approach to 1,000 villages, it would cost approximately $300 million. Now, that's a lot of money for a small organization like EPN. But the World Bank and the Millennium Challenge Corporation have already pledged $500 million to the government of Niger for rural agricultural development. So the money is there. But you also need the human resources. In this case, we're talking about hundreds of qualified technicians to embed themselves in these rural villages for years at a time. Unfortunately, knowledgeable field technicians in agriculture, and particularly in horticulture, are virtually non-existent in Niger, and for that matter, virtually non-existent in the continent of Africa. So that is why our major focus now is on creating what we intend to become the preeminent horticultural training center in the country of Niger, and perhaps in all of West Africa. It'll be named in honor of Professor Pasternak as a lasting legacy and fulfillment of his dream to bring not just food security, but economic security to the subsistence farmers of Niger. Dov was many things. He was a visionary, mentor, humanitarian, but especially a great teacher. He had a love affair with Africa and with the people of Niger, and he'd be thrilled to see us put this last critical piece in place. The center will graduate about 40 field technicians a year. A good field technician can support up to 5 villages. So in 5 years' time, the center can train enough technicians to support 1,000 villages. And as more years go by, we'll create a new generation of skilled agricultural professionals who firmly believe in the goal of economic security and who understand step by step how you empower rural farmers to make it happen. The cost to create the center is about $1.4 million. We've raised a third of the money already, enough to purchase the land, bring in all the utilities, and construct the training gardens and conference facilities. We're working to raise the last $900,000 to build the main campus, which you see in the picture here on the right. The main campus will include classrooms, science labs, a computer room, offices, a cafeteria, and a 24-room dormitory. If we can raise at least $500,000 of that money by this September, and if the pandemic doesn't get in the way of construction, we can be ready to open our doors by October of 2021. Now, we've been working on Farmers of the Future for over a decade. As I said, it's EPN's largest and most ambitious project. We believe it has the power to lift subsistence farmers out of poverty. And if we can play an important role in scaling the concept, it has the ability to really transform agricultural practice in the country of Niger.